The stars over the Karin homeworld were cold and silent. The night sky had once been a place of comfort for the people of Karin, a reminder that their fleets patrolled the borders and kept their homes safe. Now it was a reminder of their weakness. Their fleets were gone. Their colonies were silent. And their enemies moved closer every single day. Inside the great council chamber of the capital city, tall towers of white stone surrounded a circular hall where the last leaders of the Karin Union had gathered. The air felt heavy. No one spoke for a long time. The silence was not peaceful. It was the silence of fear. High Speaker Tora stood at the center of the circle. His silver robe dragged across the floor as he turned to look at the faces around him. These were not warriors. These were farmers, engineers, builders, and scholars. The Union had always believed in peace and trade. They had not built their strength on war. That choice had made them rich in knowledge, but weak in battle. Tora lifted a small silver sphere from the center table. It glowed with a soft blue light. It was a signal beacon, built long ago as a last resort. It had never been used before. It carried a single message to anyone who might be listening in deep space. The message was a plea. It was a cry for help. "The Vruel have crossed the rim line," said Eldarina. Her hands shook as she spoke. She had lost 2 sons to the first wave of attacks. Her voice was thin but steady. "We must send it. If we wait longer, they will reach the capital. There will be no one left to save." General Moore, one of the few military officers still alive, clenched his fists. "We have no ships left. The defense rings are broken. If we do not call for aid now, we are finished." A council member whispered, "And if we call for help, who will answer?" The outer powers have already turned away. The central alliances closed their gates. No one wants to fight the Vruel. Tora's voice rose with more strength than before. "Someone will hear. Someone must. We cannot face the Vruel alone. We must trust that there is at least one force among the stars that still answers a call for mercy." The council voted with slow, tired hands. One by one, every hand was raised. They had no other choice. Tora pressed his palm against the sphere. The blue light flared brighter, and a message began to travel across deep space. It was not long. It did not offer payment. It did not make promises. It only spoke the truth of their danger. It said that the Sharan people were under attack. It said they begged for aid. It said they begged for mercy. As the light from the sphere faded, a deep quiet returned to the chamber. Rena wiped a tear from her face. "Do you really think anyone will come?" Tora looked up at the night sky through the open dome above. "I do not know. But I will not let the last song of our people be silence." The days that followed felt longer than any in living memory. The Vruel moved across the nearby colonies like a storm of fire. Reports came in, one after another. First, the mines on the edge of the rim line fell. Then the trade moons were gone. Then, a fleet of Karin ships tried to resist and was destroyed in less than an hour. Every Karin learned to live with the sound of alarms. The people built shelters under the cities. They stored what food they could. There were no more songs in the markets. There were no more children playing outside. The skies had become the enemy. At night, in the council chamber, Tora stood alone and watched the stars. He wondered what kind of beings might be listening to their message. Perhaps no one. Perhaps the message was already lost in the dark. Perhaps even if someone heard it, they would be too far away. He thought of the stories told in old cycles. Stories of other civilizations beyond the known trade routes. Some said there were worlds of cold machines. Some said there were silent giants who spoke without words. And some, though very few believed, spoke of a small blue world that lay far away from the busy trade corridors. A world called Earth. Earth was not a legend of kindness. It was a legend of survival. Old stories said that if Earth rose in war, it did not stop until the enemy was gone. Many said the stories were exaggerated. Others said Earth was only a myth. But in that quiet hour, Tora wished with all his strength that the myth was real. The Vruel came closer. Their ships were like black glass, with edges sharp as blades. They did not speak. They did not negotiate. They consumed. They left nothing behind. Their advance was steady and unstoppable. General Moore stood on the balcony of the defense tower and watched the lights of the enemy fleet on the long-range sensors. His jaw tightened. He had fought all his life to protect the Union, but he knew that the line was already broken. Behind him, his second officer spoke. "Sir, the last of the planetary shields will fall within 2 weeks if we cannot replace the generators." Moore nodded slowly. "We have no ships to protect them. It will not take the Vrul 2 weeks. It will take them 3 days once they move." Moore turned and walked down the steps into the command center. He looked at the tired faces of the soldiers and engineers. Most of them were volunteers. Some had never touched a weapon before this war, yet they stood at their posts. He spoke with a calm, hard voice. "We do not stop fighting. We hold until we cannot. If help comes, we hold until they arrive. If no help comes, we hold anyway." The soldiers saluted him with quiet determination. They were afraid, but they were not broken. Far from the capital, in the refugee tunnels under the mountains, a young girl named Myra sat with her grandmother. Myra was only 8 seasons old. She had never seen a sky without war. She asked her grandmother what the world was like before the Vru came. Her grandmother smiled weakly and told her about green fields, rivers that ran clear, and festivals that filled the air with music. Myra listened with wide eyes. She could not imagine such a place. To her, the world had always been metal walls and dark skies. Myra asked, "Will someone save us?" Her grandmother held her close. "We have sent our voice into the stars. Sometimes when you ask for help with a true heart, someone hears." On the 5th day after the signal was sent, Tora stood before the council again. There was still no answer. Some council members whispered of surrender. Some spoke of escaping into the deep tunnels and leaving the surface to the Vruel. Tora raised his hand. "We will not surrender. We will not hide. Even if no one answers, we will not let the Vru end us in silence. But I still believe someone will come. Someone always does." At that same moment, in the dark reaches of space beyond the Curran Rim, a small group of listening stations detected the weak signal. Most ignored it. It was just another dying world. There were many in these years, but one station did not ignore it. It belonged to Earth Command. The message was decoded and transmitted to the Fleet Council of Earth. The room was simple, gray, and filled with men and women who had grown up in a world that did not know softness. Earth had faced wars long before it had ever looked to the stars. Earth had learned how to survive by becoming stronger than its enemies. Commander Rion read the message carefully. He did not see it as a request. He saw it as a call to act. He looked at the officers around him. The Vrul again. They have moved into another system. This one has no military strength. If they fall, the Vrul will have a direct path into the core. We cannot let them spread. One of the officers asked, "Do we wait for the Alliance Council?" Rion shook his head. "The Council will debate until the Vrul finish their work. We will not wait. We move now." Back on the Karn homeworld, the night sky was quiet again. Tora walked out to the highest balcony and stared into the stars. He thought of the people sleeping in the tunnels. He thought of the soldiers on the broken defense lines. He thought of Mira and every child who had never known peace. He whispered a silent wish to the stars. A light flickered at the edge of the horizon. At first, it was faint, like a distant star. Then another appeared. Then another. A pattern of lights grew slowly, moving with purpose. Tora narrowed his eyes and felt his heart beat faster. The lights were not stars. They were ships. The first of the human warships arrived without a single word of introduction. Their hulls were black as the void. Their engines burned with cold blue fire. The Quran sensors detected them and sent alerts across the city's dot. Inside the council chamber, alarms rang. General Moore rushed in with his officers. "Unknown fleet detected." "Not Vrul. They are not broadcasting any threat signals." Rena grabbed Tora's arm. "Who are they?" Tora's voice trembled. "Maybe the ones who heard us." On the edge of the Karan system, the human fleet formed a wall of steel. Rian stood on the bridge of the lead ship, staring at the holographic map of the Vrul advance. His face was calm and steady. "Send word to the Karan," he said. "Tell them to hold their lines. We will take it from here." A single transmission was sent to the Karan command network. It contained only 6 words. "This is Earth Command. Hold position." Tora heard the message and felt something in his chest he had not felt in many cycles. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was hope. The night sky of Karan was no longer silent. It had answered. The sky over the Karan capital was darker than usual. The enemy fleet had not yet entered the orbit, but every Karan knew the Vrul would not stop. The Union was weak, and the world had grown quiet with fear. Yet, in that same sky, a new light had appeared. It was not the red glow of destruction. It was a cold and steady blue. It came from the ships that had answered the signal in the main defense tower. General Moore stood before a wide window, staring at the horizon. His officers moved quickly around him, checking sensors and systems. A sharp sound came from the comm panel. A young officer turned toward him and spoke with a nervous voice. "General, the unknown fleet has entered stable orbit around the second moon. They are not sending any threat code. Their formation is solid. They are moving like a single wall." Moore walked to the center panel and watched the holographic image of the ships. Their design was unlike anything the Union had ever seen. There were no smooth curves, no glowing banners, no sign of softness. The hulls were dark metal with sharp angles. Each ship looked like a weapon forged only for battle. "They are not traitors," Moore said. His voice was calm but heavy. Eldarina entered the room behind him. Her face was pale but steady. "Then who are they?" Moore did not answer at once. His hand moved slowly over the control panel. He magnified the image of the lead ship. The markings on its hull were clear. A single white emblem rested on the black surface. It was a circle around a single line. A human symbol. Tor entered moments later. His robe was wrapped tightly around him. His eyes locked on the image. He knew the symbol. It matched the old stories. It matched the legends, Earth, he whispered. Rena stepped forward. "Are you sure?" Tora nodded. "I have seen this mark in the archives." Earth was a name spoken in quiet places. Some said they were only a myth. If the stories are true, they are not bringers of peace. They are bringers of war. Moore straightened his shoulders. "Then we may still have a chance." A signal came from the orbit. The comms panel lit up with a simple text. No grand speech. No introduction. Only 6 words. "This is Earth's command. Hold position." The message spread across the command network. Soldiers, officers, engineers, and even civilians hiding in shelters heard the words. No one fully understood them, but the tone was strong. It sounded like a promise in the tunnels. Little Myra sat beside her grandmother. She heard the voice through the emergency radio. It was the first message in weeks that did not bring fear. She asked, "Grandmother, who is Earth?" The old woman closed her eyes. She remembered the stories her parents had told when she was young. "They are fighters, child. If they have come, then maybe we will see the sun again." On the orbit of Karan, the human fleet began to move. Commander Rian stood on the bridge of the lead ship. The bridge was simple, built for function rather than beauty. Around him, officers operated their stations with silent precision. None of them asked why they were here. They did not need to. "Status of the fleet," Rian said. His operations officer replied in a firm voice. "All ships in formation. Primary cannons charged. Launch bays ready. Enemy fleet location confirmed on long-range sensors. Estimated time of Vrul arrival is 3 standard days." Rian looked at the map floating before him. The Vrul formation was already spreading across nearby space. If they reached the planet, they would burn everything. "We do not wait," Rian said. "We meet them before they touch the ground. The Kurn have no army left. We hold the line." Another officer nodded. "The Council on Earth approved the strike. We have full command." Rian gave a single nod. Then we show them what Earth does when monsters move. The officers moved like a single unit. Orders were given, and the ships began to reposition. The Karen sensors followed their every move. The human fleet formed a wide shield around the moon like a wall of iron back on the surface. The council chamber was filled with worried voices. Many had never seen a human. Few even believed the stories were real. Tora raised his hands to quiet the room. "They have answered," he said. "The humans have come." One council member spoke with fear. "But will they save us? Or will they bring another war to our world?" Moore faced the council. His voice was strong. "The Vrul are already bringing war. The humans did not start this. If they stand with us, we may still live to see another sunrise." Rena nodded slowly. "We have no other choice. We must trust them," the council agreed. A message was sent to the human fleet, welcoming them to Karen space. The reply came within minutes. It was a simple request. "Do not interfere. Prepare to protect civilians. We handle the rest." The words carried weight. They were not a suggestion. They were an order from a force that did not beg. Night came over the Karen capital. For the first time in many months, the people came out from the tunnels to look at the sky. They saw the dark shapes of the human ships moving like silent guardians. Children pointed to the lights and asked questions their parents could not answer. Farmers, builders, and traders stared with quiet hope. Inside the defense tower, Moore watched the sensor readings with steady eyes. The humans had begun to deploy small satellites around the planet. Each one carried powerful weapons and shields. The defense grid was growing stronger with every hour. He turned to Tora. "They move like they have done this 1,000 times before." Tora nodded. "Perhaps they have." On the bridge of the human flagship, Commander Rion received a transmission from one of the Karen leaders. Tora appeared on the screen, his face lined with fatigue, but also respect. "Commander Rion," Tora said, "on behalf of the Karen Union, I welcome you. You came when others turned away. We owe you our thanks." Rion's expression remained calm. "We are not here for thanks. The Vruel will be here soon. We stop them, or your world falls. That is all that matters." Tora lowered his head. "Then we will trust you. The people will hold their ground." Rion gave a small nod. "Keep your civilians under protection. Do not let anyone near the upper atmosphere. When the fight begins, it will not be gentle." The transmission ended. Tora stood in the chamber, staring at the silent screen. He knew these were not saviors of light. These were warriors of stone. 2 days passed. The Vrul fleet entered the outer edge of the system. Their ships were dark and twisted. They moved in silence, like a tide of shadows. Every Karen sensor sounded the alarm. Across the city, soldiers moved to their posts. Civilians retreated into the shelters. On the orbit, the human fleet aligned their formations. Rion watched the enemy ships appear on the holographic map. The Vrul fleet outnumbered the humans by 3-1. It did not matter. "Enemy in range in 10 minutes, the weapons officer said. Rion stood tall. "Open all guns. Deploy the forward line." The human fleet spread out in a perfect arc, each ship locking into position with exact timing. Fighters launched from the bays in swarms. They formed wings that glowed faintly in the dark. The Karen defense screens showed the movement. The people gasped at the precision. Moore whispered under his breath. "They move like a storm." Vrul sent no message. Their ships advanced without hesitation. They believed this world was weak. They believed the humans were just another voice begging for mercy. But they did not understand Earth. The first shot came from a human cruiser. A single line of light cut through space. It struck a Vrul ship and split its hull. The debris burned like fire. The second shot came a breath later. Then the entire human fleet opened fire. The battle began before the enemy had time to react. From the surface, Mira sat near a small screen in the shelter. She watched streaks of light rise into the sky. She had never seen a space battle. The other children pressed closer to the screen. None of them spoke. They could see flashes as the human fleet met the Vrul head-on. Above, the sky turned bright. Human ships moved with sharp coordination. They did not wait for the enemy to dictate the rhythm. They cut through formations with brutal precision. Each shot was aimed with purpose. Each maneuver was part of a larger plan. The rural ships began to break. Inside the command center, Rian gave short and clear orders. Line 2, hold the left flank. Line 3, cut through the second wave. No ship moves without signal. We keep the shield wall intact. The officers followed every word. Earth had fought many wars. This was just another battlefield. The Kharan forces watched from the ground. Their own ships were too damaged to join, but their sensors told the story. For the first time since the war began, the Vruel were not advancing. They were being pushed back. Moore clenched his fists. They are winning. Tora looked at him. No, they are fighting. They will win when the last Vruel ship is gone. In the shelters, the people began to whisper. It was not the whisper of fear anymore. It was the whisper of hope. Mira's grandmother held her hand. Look, child. Look at the sky. Someone heard us. On the bridge, Rian stared at the map. The Vruel flagship was approaching. It was larger than any ship the Kharan had ever seen. Its black surface looked like it could swallow light. Target the flagship, Rian said. All heavy weapons prepare to fire. The human ships adjusted their angle with cold precision. The flagship loomed closer. Rian waited for the right distance. When it came, he gave the order with a single word, fire. The sky above Kharan burned with light as the flagship was struck by a wave of human fire. The first impact shattered its forward shields. The second broke its engines. The smoke of the Vruel wreckage still drifted through the upper layers of the sky. Fragments of shattered ships burned like falling stars. Across the Kharan world, every eye was lifted toward the heavens. The people who had once waited for death were now watching the enemy retreat. The human fleet hovered above the moon like a wall of steel. No ship had broken. No formation had faltered. The Vruel had been crushed in the first wave. But Commander Rian did not celebrate. He stood at the center of the flagship bridge, staring at the map that displayed the entire star sector. The Vruel flagship had been destroyed, but their main swarm was still out there. They had not sent their full force. This attack had only been a scouting arm of their fleet. The real storm had yet to come. His second officer stepped forward. Enemy reinforcements are gathering beyond the Dark Belt. If they regroup, they will come with greater numbers. This planet will not survive a siege without more support. Rian kept his voice steady. We will not let them regroup. We end this before they touch the ground again. The bridge grew quiet. Everyone knew what this meant. It was not defense anymore. It was a strike. On the surface, General Moore walked through the defense tower. Soldiers were repairing damaged stations. Engineers worked without rest to rebuild broken shield lines. The night air smelled of smoke and metal. The ground trembled under the falling remains of enemy ships. Elder Rena joined him near the control deck. She looked tired but strong. We have survived the first wave, she said. Moore nodded. Because the humans stood where we could not. But the Vruel will not stop. They will return with everything they have. Rena glanced at the sky. Do you think the humans can face them again? Moore looked at the distant blue lights of the human fleet. They do not look like a people who step back. In the council chamber, Tora met with the remaining leaders. The room no longer carried the same fear as before. There was still uncertainty, but it was mixed with something stronger. Hope had returned, though it was quiet and cautious. Tora spoke first. The Vruel have been defeated in the first battle, but this was not their main force. The humans know this. They are preparing to strike before the enemy can gather again. We must be ready to support them in every way we can. One of the council members asked, Do they need our support? They fight like nothing we have ever seen. Tora answered firmly, Even a storm needs a shore to stand on. Our role may be small, but we will not be idle while others fight for our lives. On the orbit, the human fleet reorganized. Drones scanned the battlefield and marked the path of the fleeing Vruel. The humans moved with sharp and perfect coordination. There was no wasted motion. Each ship had a purpose. Each action was part of a larger plan. Rian walked toward the front window of the bridge. He watched the glow of the Karan world below. It was peaceful at a distance, but he knew the cost of that peace. He had seen too many worlds fall to the Vruel in the past. His communications officer turned to him. "Commander, the Karan Council has offered resources. They wish to assist the fleet in any way they can." Rian nodded once. "They will keep the civilians safe. That is all we ask." The officer relayed the message back. At the edge of the system, the Vruel swarm moved like a dark tide. Their ships gathered in great clusters around a massive central vessel. It was larger than any ship they had ever sent to the outer systems. It moved slowly, but carried the power to crush worlds. Inside the swarm, the Vruel commanders prepared their second wave. They did not speak words like humans or Karen. They moved with instinct and cold hunger. The defeat of their first fleet was not a warning to them. It was a challenge. They wanted to crush the enemy that had dared to stand in their path. They turned their swarm toward the Karan world, on the human flagship. Rian gathered his senior officers. They stood around a large tactical display. It showed the Vruel swarm forming at the far edge of the star system. "Our sensors show more than 100 enemy vessels," the operations officer reported. "Their largest ship is at the center. If we allow it to reach the planet, it will break the shield network in one strike." Rian studied the glowing map. "Then it never reaches the planet. We meet them halfway. We strike first. We break them before they can build their wall." The officers nodded. No one hesitated. They knew how Earth fought. Rian gave clear orders. "Fleet 1 will form the forward spear. Fleet 2 will flank the enemy from the right. Drones will jam their sensors and isolate the flagship. We will remove the head and the swarm will break." The officers moved out without delay. Down on the surface, Mira sat with her grandmother again. The night was quiet, but the people could feel the tension. They could feel that another storm was coming. Mira pressed her small hands together. "Grandmother," she asked, "will they come back?" Her grandmother held her close. "Yes, child. But the humans will meet them. You saw what they did before. They will do it again. This is not the end. This is the fight for the light of our world." Mira nodded. She was too young to understand war, but she understood courage. Hours later, Karan's skies were lit by the engines of the human fleet as they began to move. Hundreds of small lights spread out in formation. They were silent, but their movement carried power. Every city, every shelter. And every soldier on the ground watched as the human fleet left orbit to face the enemy in the dark belt. "General." Moore stood on the balcony of the tower. Tora joined him. "They are leaving the safety of orbit," Moore said. "They are going to meet the enemy in open space." Tora placed his hand on the railing. "They are not running away. They are taking the fight to the monsters." In the cold void between the stars, the human fleet advanced. The Vruel swarm moved to meet them. The two forces cut through the darkness like opposing tides. On the flagship bridge, Rian spoke with calm strength. "All ships, lock positions. We move as one. No one breaks formation without order." The human ships spread into a wide V shape. At the center of the formation, the flagship led the way. Drone swarms launched ahead, filling the space with interference signals. The Vruel responded with a surge of ships. Their swarm twisted and turned like a living creature. They believed their numbers would crush anything in their path, but numbers alone could not. Stop Earth. The first human strike came like a blade. Torpedoes and beams cut into the front of the Vruel formation. Enemy ships exploded one after another. The swarm faltered as their lines broke apart. Rian gave the next order. "Fleet 2, move to the right flank. Cut through their center. Fleet 1, hold and advance." The human formation shifted with precision. Vruel ships tried to encircle them, but the humans were faster. Their weapons targeted weak points with exact aim. The Karan defense towers picked up the battle feed. Across the planet, people gathered around screens. They watched the human fleet push deep into the Vrul swarm like a hammer striking a wall. Rena stood in the council chamber, staring at the screen. "They fight like no army I have ever seen," Tora answered softly. "They are not just an army. They are something forged by endless war." The Vrul flagship moved forward. Its dark hull was covered in armor plates. Energy crackled around it. Smaller Vrul ships gathered near it to protect their leader. It was the heart of the swarm. Rian watched it appear on the map. He knew this was the key. If the flagship fell, the swarm would scatter. "All heavy ships," he said, "focus fire on the flagship. Bring it down." A wave of human fire lit the void. Beams of energy and missile trails crossed the darkness. The flagship shook under the assault. Its shields flared bright, but cracks began to form. The Vrul responded with a counterattack. A storm of energy bolts hit the human fleet. One cruiser took a direct hit and spun away, but the line did not break. The humans held their formation. On the surface, Mira's shelter shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Some children screamed, but Mira kept her eyes on the screen. She saw the flagship shaking under the human fire. She gripped her grandmother's hand. "Will they win?" She whispered. Her grandmother held her close. "They will." Back in the void, Rian stepped forward. "All ships advance. Break their shield. End this." The human fleet surged forward. Fighters dove through the Vrul lines, striking engines in weak spots. Drones exploded inside the swarm, tearing holes in their formation. The Vrul flagship tried to fire back, but the humans did not give it time. 3 heavy cruisers locked their weapons on the same point of the flagship's armor. They fired together. The hull cracked open. Energy poured out. Rian gave the final order. "Finish it." A spear of light from the flagship's main cannon struck the enemy core. The Vrul flagship split apart in a storm of fire. The shockwave rippled through the swarm. Vrul ships broke formation. Many tried to flee, but the humans chased them down. The Charon people cheered as the image of the flagship explosion reached the surface. Soldiers in the defense towers lifted their fists. Civilians cried with joy. The monsters that had once seemed unstoppable were falling under the strike of Earth. Rena turned to Tora with shining eyes. "They did it again. They broke them." Tora nodded. "They are not a myth. They are real. And they are far stronger than the stories ever said." The battle lasted 3 more hours. By the end, the Vrul swarm was shattered. Only fragments remained, fleeing into the dark. The human fleet stood firm, still in formation, like a steel wall. The Karin homeworld had not seen such silence for years. For the first time since the Vrul invasion began, the stars above their capital city were calm. The Karan leaders walked across the landing fields and watched the human ships resting in orbit. Their design was strange to the Karin. These ships were not made for beauty. They were built like iron walls, heavy and strong. Every angle showed a single purpose. These ships were made for war. Commander Rian stood near the edge of the landing zone. He looked at the endless plain beyond the city. The land was burned in black. The Vrul had tried to break this world, but they had failed. Behind Rian, the human soldiers moved in lines. They were checking their weapons, repairing their armor, and preparing for whatever might come next. None of them celebrated. They did not smile. They acted like people who had done this many times before. The Karin Council approached with slow steps. Their leader Tara stopped in front of Rian. Her eyes showed respect, but also fear. She had seen what the humans did in the battle. She had seen how the Vrul ships were cut apart with precision. She had seen how the human soldiers advanced without fear. Tira spoke with a careful voice. She asked why humans fought this way. She asked how they could face such danger with no hesitation. Rian did not answer right away. He looked at the dark sky. The memory of old wars on Earth lived inside him. Then he spoke. He told Tira that Earth had faced monsters long before they ever reached the stars. Humanity had learned not to run. Humanity had learned to stand together. Humanity had built weapons not for glory, but for survival. He said that on Earth every generation had faced something that tried to crush them. They had always fought back. Tara listened with silent attention. She had heard stories about Earth from traders and scouts. Many said humans were unpredictable. Many said humans were dangerous. Now she understood why. They were not dangerous because they wanted power. They were dangerous because they knew what it meant to lose everything. Rion's words carried the weight of many wars. In the city below, the Quran people were slowly coming out of their shelters. They walked in the streets and looked at the sky where human ships still floated. Children pointed at the silver trails in the clouds. Older Karen whispered about the humans. Some felt hope, some felt fear, but all of them felt the same truth. The war had changed because the humans had arrived. Rion gathered officers near a metal table that had been set up in the command tent. Maps of the Quran system covered the surface. The Vrul fleet was in ruins, but the humans were not leaving yet. They had learned that the Vrul never gave up after one defeat. They always returned. Rion told his officers they had to prepare for another attack. They could not relax. Victory was not a moment. It was a line they had to hold. Across the table, Lieutenant Mara pointed at a cluster of signals on the edge of the star map. She believed a small part of the Vrul fleet had escaped. Rion nodded. He knew they would regroup. He knew they would come again. But this time, the Quran were not alone. He told the officers to set up defense lines, supply points, and observation posts. The humans moved with discipline. Every order was followed without question. Tira arrived at the command tent a few hours later. She saw the humans working together like a single machine. She was amazed. Her own army was tired and broken, but the humans showed no weakness. She asked Rion why they did not rest. He told her that rest would come after the threat was truly gone. He said that peace was something they earned by standing ready. Later that night, Rion walked through the ruined city. The streets were quiet. The buildings were cracked and burned, but lights were returning to some windows. A group of Karen children ran past him, laughing softly for the first time in many months. He stopped for a moment. He thought of home. He thought of the Earth he had left behind. He had seen cities like this on his own world. He had seen people rise again after everything was lost. It reminded him why humans never stopped fighting. On the top floor of the old council building, Tira gathered her advisors. She spoke about the humans. She told them what Rion had said. She explained that Earth was not a world of endless peace. It was a world that had survived storms and wars and darkness. She said the humans were strong because they had to be. Some advisors felt uneasy. They asked if humans might one day become a danger too. Tira answered with calm words. She said power could be feared, but it could also be respected. The humans had come when no one else did. The next day, Rion stood before a crowd of Karen soldiers. Many of them had fought, but had lost hope before the humans came. Now they looked at him with a new kind of respect. Rion spoke about what it meant to stand when the world felt lost. He told them that the Vrul could return, but this time they would not face them alone. He told them that together they could protect their world. His words were not loud or filled with fancy promises. His words were steady like iron. They reached every heart in that field. The human soldiers trained the Quran units to fight in a new way. They showed them how to build defensive walls, how to track enemy ships, and how to fight together instead of scattered. Every day the sound of drills echoed across the valley. The Karen learned quickly. They did not want to be helpless again. They wanted to stand beside the humans, not behind them, at the same time deep in space. The escaped Vrul ships gathered in the shadows of a broken moon. Their leader growled as they watched the ruined remains of their fleet. They had never faced a force like this before. They were used to easy victories. But Earth was different. The humans fought without fear. The Vrul would return with more ships. But now they understood their enemy was not weak prey. Back on the surface, Rion looked at the horizon. He felt the weight of the coming battle. He knew what would happen when the Vrul returned. There would be no easy win. But he also knew the Karen had found their courage again. Earth had shown them a path. They were no longer only begging for help. They were preparing to stand. In the control tower, Mara received a faint signal from deep space. It was a transmission from the Vrul. It carried no words of surrender. It was a challenge. They wanted to test the strength that had broken them. Mara showed it to Rian. He did not smile. He simply said they would be ready. Tira came to stand beside him. She no longer looked like a leader crushed by fear. She looked like a leader who had found her fire again. She told Rian that her people would fight this time. They would not hide in caves and shelters. Rian looked at her and gave a short nod. In that single moment, two worlds understood each other without any more words. The night before the Vruel returned. The stars above the Curran world shone clear. Human soldiers stood side by side with Curran soldiers. They shared no songs, no long speeches. They only shared a quiet promise. When the enemy came again, they would not fall. This was the truth of Earth. This was the lesson they carried to every star. The cold night passed slowly. Every soldier on the Sharan world waited for the return of the Vrul. The sky above the valley was dark and silent. Human soldiers checked their weapons again and again. Karen soldiers stood beside them with steady hands. They no longer looked like people waiting to be saved. They looked like fighters ready to protect their home. Commander Rian walked between the lines of defense. His boots left marks on the hard ground. He looked at every position, every shield wall, and every battery. His eyes were calm. His voice was clear. He gave no long speech. He only told them that they were ready. His presence was enough to make the soldiers stand taller. Tira stood on the command platform near the main defense line. She wore a simple uniform. Her people had trusted her even in fear, and now they trusted her in strength. She looked at the night sky and thought about everything that had happened. She remembered the day when the Vruel arrived. She remembered the panic, the cries, and the helplessness. Then she remembered the day the human ships entered their orbit. That was the day the darkness changed. Far beyond the system, the Vrul ships moved like a shadow storm. Their leader had gathered everything that remained. They believed they could crush the humans and the Karen in one strike. They did not understand that something inside the Sharan had changed. They did not understand that humans were not just soldiers. They were a force built by many battles. The first alarms sounded as the enemy entered the outer range. The night sky filled with faint red dots. The ships were coming fast. The human fleet was already moving. Rian gave the order with a firm voice. The defense lines powered up. Energy barriers rose from the ground. The walls shone with steady light. Human and Quran artillery pointed at the sky. Mara was inside the control tower with her team. She gave updates to the ground units. Her hands moved fast across the controls. She tracked every ship. She called out coordinates. The human fleet formed a wide net around the planet. They were not going to wait for the Vrul to land. They were going to meet them in space first. When the first Vrul ships crossed the defense line, the battle began. Human guns fired in perfect rhythm. The night sky turned bright with streaks of fire. Explosions echoed across the dark. The Vrul ships moved like a swarm, but the human formation was tight and strong. They cut through the enemy lines with skill and precision. On the ground, Tira watched the battle from the platform. Her heart pounded, but not with fear. She felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt strength. She turned to her officers and gave orders with confidence. Her army was ready to fight if the enemy landed. Some Vrul ships managed to break through the human net. They entered the lower atmosphere. Their black holes glimmered as they fell. Karen and human ground units aimed their weapons at the falling shadows. When the ships touched the ground, the soldiers opened fire. The land shook with the power of the defense line. Rian moved to the front line with his squad. He did not stay behind to give orders. He stood where the fight was thick. His soldiers followed him without hesitation. Karen units stood beside them, shoulder to shoulder. The air filled with the sound of engines, weapons, and shields. The Vruel were fierce. But they were not ready for an enemy that did not break. The humans advanced with heavy steps, clearing one line after another. The Karen followed, covering the flanks and pushing the enemy back. Every meter of ground was fought for, but but no step was lost. Mara's voice echoed through the communication channels. She gave new coordinates and directed fire on enemy ships still trying to land. One by one, the Vrul dropships were struck down before they could reach the ground. The sky burned with falling wrecks. Tira's forces moved through the ruined streets of the city. They had trained with the humans for weeks. They now used that training with precision. Vrul soldiers tried to spread through the city, but they were met with strong resistance. For the first time in this war, the Quran were not hiding. They were fighting back. The turning point came when the Vrul leader's flagship tried to break through the upper orbit. Rian knew that this ship carried the command structure of the enemy. If it fell, the entire Vrul attack would break. He gathered a small strike group and boarded a fast ship. Mara stayed behind to keep the ground battle coordinated. Tira took full control of the defense lines on the surface. The human strike group moved. Through the firestorm of the upper orbit, the Vrul flagship was massive. Its surface was covered in scars from the first battle. Rian's ship slipped through the outer defenses. They docked on a weak section of the hull and entered the ship. Inside the corridors, the human soldiers moved with calm and focus. The Vrul defenders rushed to stop them. But every move was met with swift action. The humans were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting to end the threat. Rian led his team to the command core. The corridors echoed with the sound of heavy steps and short bursts of fire. On the surface, the Karen lines pushed forward. Tira moved with her soldiers. She carried a simple weapon and fought beside them. Her people saw her in the field and felt their courage grow. They shouted together. They held their ground with firm hearts. The Vrul forces began to lose shape. Their attack lines broke apart under the united front. Inside the flagship, Rian reached the core chamber. The Vrul leader stood there. The creature was tall and covered in black armor. It had expected fear. Instead, it saw Rian walking forward with steady steps. Rian said nothing. His team aimed at the control units. In a few swift strikes, they disabled the power grid and cut the command signal. The Vrul ships in orbit lost coordination. The human fleet used this moment. Mara gave the order for a full assault. The sky above the planet filled with the fire of the final strike. One by one, the enemy ships were destroyed. The swarm turned into scattered fragments. On the ground, the remaining Vrul forces saw their ships fall. Their leader was cut off. Their formation collapsed. The Quran and humans moved as one. They surrounded the remaining enemy units and ended the fight with clean precision. The war that had once seemed endless was ending before their eyes. When the sun rose over the blackened fields, the battle was over. Human soldiers stood in lines, silent and steady. Karen soldiers walked among them, tired but proud. The ruins around them were still smoking, but the enemy was gone. The Vrul had been defeated. Tira walked toward Rian as he stepped out of the captured flagship. His armor was marked with dust and burns, but his eyes were calm. She looked at him with deep respect. She thanked him for what he and his people had done, but Rian shook his head. He told her that the victory did not belong to Earth alone. It belonged to those who chose to stand and fight together. The people of Karen gathered in the city center. They raised their flags again. They rebuilt their homes with steady hands. Their children no longer whispered in fear when they looked at the sky. They now spoke of courage. The story of the night when humans came to stand beside them spread through every corner of their world. News of the Vrul defeat spread to other systems. Worlds that once believed the Vrul could not be stopped now knew a different truth. They heard that the humans from Earth had fought without hesitation. They heard that the Quran had found their strength again. Across the stars, whispers grew into stories. Stories grew into legends. Rian and his soldiers prepared to leave the Saran world. They did not build monuments or demand rewards. They repaired their ships and packed their gear. Tira met Rian one last time on the landing field. She told him that her people would never forget what happened. Rian answered that they must never wait for help again. He told her that strength was not something that could be given. It was something that had to be carried. When the human fleet rose into the sky, the Karen stood together and watched. They knew that Earth would return if called. But they also knew that from this day forward they could defend their world on their own. They had learned the lesson the humans carried, far away. In the quiet of space, Rian looked out the window of his command ship. The stars stretched before him. He knew there would be other battles. He knew there would be other worlds that would call for help. Humanity would answer. Not because they wanted power, but because they remembered their own past. They knew what it meant to face monsters. The story of that day would be told for generations. Not as a tale of weakness, but as a tale of unity. The Vrul had believed Earth was a distant world with soft hearts. They had learned that Earth carried a strength born from countless struggles. They had begged for mercy, but Earth gave them only iron will. The Quran world stood free under a clear sky. Their people worked together to rebuild. Children played in the streets where soldiers once stood. Flags waved in the wind. The scars of war would remain, but they would no longer be symbols of fear. They would be reminders of the day when two worlds stood together and did not fall.